So I'll say something about the virus because a lot of people have asked me about a practice. And um, we need to understand how the different mantras really work. And once we understand it, it'll be easier to be effective. If we repeat the name of God, that's any name that came through revelation. And there aren't that many, but there are enough. If we repeat that, it kindles some energy in our soul that is all energy. And it directs it towards a certain target. It's not precise on purpose, because the world is not really based on cause and effect. It just seems to be. But it does kind of invite the soul to aim in a certain direction. So, so many of the indigenous peoples in the world are so conscious of the directions. And the reason is because we are giving this message through our consciousness and our unconsciousness that we're kind of heading there, wherever it is. And I told this story a couple of years ago. I told it here. I was on the Hopi reservation, and there was a big dance, a bear dance, and I was invited to the dance. And when I asked directions of a number of people, they said, "Oh, it's there." They didn't say, "Go down the road 2 miles, turn." I said, "What? Where?" They said, "There. Go there, you'll find it," which I did. But we wouldn't do that. We don't think that way. So when we do practices with the names that came through revelation, we are inviting our soul, which is now energized by the sound, to head in a certain direction. Of course, the soul is all directions. But we're just inviting it to, this is not literally true, but in a sense, to be a little more present towards this way rather than that way. So that's the first level that the practices, the mantras work in. Also, the soul gets happy when it hears its name. And this is not some myth. This is the reality. The soul is energy. It is God. And somebody's got to please turn off your sound. Mute your mic, your screen. So when the soul gets happy, it gets more able to create a change in the world of form. In reality, the soul can do anything. But remember, the soul is not the mind. So it doesn't think, I want this, I want this to be happy. It just, the happiness of the soul means it is more conscious of itself. Not as an ego, but that it exists. So when we do some practice, the energy of the soul, because it is more self-aware, is more able to interfere in the world of form and to create an outcome. It's not magic, though. I mean, yeah, you can kind of be a terrible person, forgive me, and say practice, it'll have an effect, but the effect is quite limited. Because if your life is not living it in some way, it's not like some magic potion. And the energy recognizes that which is counterfeit, and it won't energize that in the way that we had hoped. But if we're conscious, and that means, we would say the word is if we're prayerful. So if you do a practice, I do a practice, and we're in a state of prayer, whatever that means to you, probably a better word is connection, a state of connection. Then the soul responds in a different way. Is it precise? Not necessarily, and probably not for anybody in this room or on the Zoom call. Why is it not precise? And why did I say that about nobody in this room? The experience of life on earth is to, at some point, surrender. You know, the whole thing about Islam and all that, it really means at some point in your life you're going to surrender. You might as well do it now. So, because it gets us past our mental constructs and concepts, which I don't mind if we have mental constructs and concepts if we can control them. If they control us, if we're always using the faculty of mind, it's not healthy, quite frankly. So what we can do is really limit the field of possibilities and make the shift, which in a non-spiritual word, but a very critical word, shifts us from possibilities to probabilities. That's the best we can do. Are there beings who could actually shift from possibilities to probabilities to precise actualities? There are some who are a lot better at it than most others. And their field of probabilities really narrows down. So when we do a practice, we want to bring our full self so that we can really awaken that energy, and we can bring the energy through us, not into us, because it's always there, but through us, and we can narrow down the field of possibilities to probabilities. And how do we do that? Prayer and intention. Now, forgive me, but intention is not putting an affirmation on the refrigerator. That's a different practice. Intention is something quite precise that isn't burdened by words. Now, the mind thinks, how the hell can you have an intention if you don't know what it is, if you can't frame it, if you can't say it? Well, every time we frame the intention, although it does create a more limited field of possibilities, it's not pure, because it's going through the lens of the mind. And the lens of the mind is focused by our own experiences as a human being, by our conditioning. So then what do? Well, you don't. Real prayer is not, I want this, or save the world, or make me healthy. That is a level of prayer that is elementary. Real prayer, as we know, we say it all the time, toward the one, is to actually be in the presence and have be able to pass the test of faith. What's the test of faith? The test of faith is that we are within the Supreme Being, to use the phrase they use in the East, and the Supreme Being is within us. It's not just that, we're the little marionette or puppet on the string, but we are in God, God is in us. Hence, being conscious of that, with a connection with our highest self, with our soul, without thinking that, brings the intention that is from our depth as a human being. That's the test of faith. Because we're very, very, very hesitant to believe what we can't think, to believe what we can't say. And at some level, sure, it's nice for everybody to pray, oh, the world should be healthy and peaceful and happy and all of those things. But they're limited. The real spiritual being is in such perfect, close connection with the infinite that they don't have to wish. They have enough faith to know that their not knowing is in the Alim, is in God's knowing. And we know the phrase Allahu Akbar. There's another phrase that's very powerful, Allahu Alam. What does it mean? God knows. So we say, well, if God knows, I want to know. Well, how come we didn't know about this virus a year ago? God knew. How come we didn't know? How come we don't know if there's going to be toilet paper at Costco tomorrow? How come we don't know these things? Well, where your heart is, there your treasure is. We've all heard this. If our heart is in how can I have this body survive, which is the fundamental aspect of being human, then that's where all of our treasure is. I remember I was here a few months ago or a year ago, maybe some of you remember, and I was speaking about this interview I read with a nurse who treated the last Karmapa when he was dying in Chicago. And you know who the Karmapa is? There's a new one now, but this was, I guess, 30 years ago, the head of the Karma sect, Karma Gadyas, one of the sects of Tibetan Buddhism. Anyway, she was his nurse, and he was in the hospital in Chicago, and the thing that shocked her was his ease about death. That wasn't his issue. He had done that already. He knew about that. That wasn't his issue. What was his issue? His issue was to be conscious and kind to whomever came and visited. Because that's where his being was. And it wasn't resignation, just to be clear. It was affirmation of the human condition. So, when we do a practice, which I think we should, or practices, and I don't care what practice you use, I really don't, but if you want to pick something intellectually, there are practices that seem to aim us towards a probability of healing or a probability of safety. But the practice I would do, I am doing, which I think is more important than all of these. Anybody want to guess? Zikr can't hurt, that's true. No, the practice is ya iman. And what does iman mean?
Faith.
Faith. Because what we need is enough faith, not in God, we don't know what God is, enough faith in ourselves that we can connect with Ya'alim, with the all-knowing. And it will know. If it leads us into death, then it leads us into death. If it leads us into life, then it leads us into life. And we don't have the luxury of being fatalistic. That's not what I'm speaking about. There's a huge difference between being fatalistic and having faith. You know, the world is a little off now. It's been off before. There's just more people to be off, and hence the energy is more. There's a lot of fear. But let me ask you a question for real, and I'm asking all of you. Would you rather go through this or a shooting war? A shooting war where young women and men are killing each other with weapons on a mass scale. And it's not that there's an alternative, one or the other, but crises arise. And now the big question, what will happen? I don't know. But I can tell all of you something, including myself. What will happen depends on everybody who hears these words. I don't know about anybody else who's not here. But there are enough of us that if we practice what we've outwardly paid obeisance to, if we practice that, we know, and this is where the faith comes in, we know we will have fulfilled our role as a human being. Is that enough? Well, that's where the faith comes in. You know, a couple of months ago, Akbar and I were driving to Fort Myers to meet a shaman, the Eskimo shaman who is there. And on the way there, I was talking to him, and I said, my part of my work now is to inwardly discover certain people who really have the power of changing human consciousness and to connect them, just like the Abrahamic reunion connected peacemakers. And in that way to change the consciousness of the planet. Akbar said, well, also, don't we have to do something? We were talking about climate change at the time. And my answer, not from my ego, but I want to share my answer because it'll help us, I think. My answer was, if you want to do that, if you want to have actions, if you want to go demonstrate, if you want to whatever, if you're guided to do that, do that. But I can only do what I'm guided to do. And what I'm guided to do is to set up or try to this non-public network. And I've spoken to some people around the planet, and not all the people I want to connect are known. Some of them I'm discovering inwardly. And not all of them have the technology where we can Zoom together. Some might be in the middle of a jungle somewhere. But there's a greater internet than the physical internet, you know, and that seems to be working. But the reason I'm telling this story is you don't have to do more than what you have to do. Otherwise, you become burdened by this terrible fake news, which is called impossibility. You know, we don't know what's possible. We don't know what's impossible. What we do know is what we need to do. If we listen, we do know what we need to do. And that's the test of faith. Everybody needs to both find their part and do their part. That's what's being asked of us. And it's nothing new. That's what's always been asked of us. So should you do Ya Iman? I don't know. You know, there are a lot of mantras. Not millions, but enough. I don't know what your way is. And I'm not going to suggest it. Because there, in this room and on the screen at this level, you know enough. What we're going to need, oddly enough, is we're going to need spiritual entrepreneurship. Not to create a new tech company. We have enough for the time being, even though there are going to be some interesting ones to come, I have a feeling. But to think, feel, connect, and what excites me? What's my passion? And to focus on that at the deepest level. What's my mission? Why am I here now? Why am I alive now? How come I didn't die 2 weeks ago? And then find that mission, and then find an exciting way, and I mean that in the true sense, not in the ego sense. In other words, a way that makes the soul happy. And the soul doesn't judge, because it does no opposites. Find a way. Be an entrepreneur. You know, what thing outside the box can I think of that's going to create the structure within me that limits the probabilities and creates a desired result? Knowing full well that the result might be different as the, quote, enterprise is built. So at this level, you know enough practices. I mean, it won't help for me to say, oh, do this or do that. But find the one that really is the one. And it will help. I feel like the infinite intelligence has given us a great boost by putting the world on retreat. You know? Now, we have to think about it. We have to feel it. The cosmic intelligence is saying, be still and know that I am God. What's your rhythm? What's the global rhythm? So, yeah, it's a test. And I want to say one more thing, and then I'll read the paper a little bit. Just so we're clear, the mind thinks, the heart feels. The power of real feeling, not the surface emotions that are jerked around by a movie or something, but the real emotions in the depth of the heart are infinitely more powerful than the thoughts of the mind. If you're feeling is fear-based, the heart is not pure. Doesn't mean we don't have moments of being scared, of course. But we have to really, and I'm offering this as a practice, really protect our hearts. We have to watch clearly our psychic boundaries. People are afraid, whether right or wrong, that's irrelevant, but people are afraid because they're not in control. And when there's a communal fear, all kinds of energies are like free radicals, they're just bouncing around. And we want our hearts to be awake, but we need to be awake enough to ask ourselves, what am I feeling? Why am I feeling this? Is this my feeling? Is this something I'm picking up? That's the real virus. And that doesn't go away with a mask or with sanitizer. It does go away with intention and spiritual practice and meditation. So that the heart can truly feel and it begins to lead us by the power of its experience. So as we know, when the heart leads and the mind follows, all is well. When the mind leads, the heart has great difficulty following, and all is not well. So, the papers. Any questions?
Rabbi,
yes.
As a filigree on what you said, I'd like to point out that the word enthusiasm means breath of God.
So if you didn't hear that, what Zaid so beautifully said was he would like to point out that the word enthusiasm means breath of God. So to be enthusiastic means to be breathing God's breath. Consciously, I guess. So a good add-on, Zaid. Thank you.
To me, there's an inner fear that I see. And that's the inner fear of people that are afraid to accept the situation that's actually here. They're afraid to be afraid. Now, when I say afraid, I mean to be present to the present circumstance. And, I have more to say on this, but I do a lot of writing, and I do better on writing than I do talking, because I get kind of enthusiastic or shaky or something.
Breath of God.
Yeah. So, thank you.
Oops. Any questions? I lost the whole gang here. Hold on. Where's your doc?
The bottom.
Oh, down the bottom?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Any questions from far and wide? Hang on, Patty. Hang on. I mentioned protecting one's psychic boundaries. Yeah. And how do you do that? First of all, it's very important to know yourself. Some people are more receptive than others. If you're more receptive than other people, well, you need to be aware of that. And oftentimes, our training as children gives us a kind of bravado to push through our receptivity, and that's not so good. Because we're still in the empathic state. We're still receiving, but we're entering a whole world of shoulds, and then we stop looking at why we're feeling what we're feeling, and the situation gets really messy. So how does one protect that? Well, the best way I know, the first most important way, is to have periods of silence. It's very hard if either the voice or the mind is always talking. Even though I'm sitting here yakking for 45 minutes. But silence really enables us to ask, what am I feeling? Is this my feeling? I mean, most people won't even do that. We assume everything we think is our own thought. Ridiculous. It is. It's ridiculous. And especially now, because when people get fearful, there's a certain kind of energy in thought. And we know enough practices. Certainly I would and I do the purification breaths. You know, the thoughts are held in the mind and in the heart by the elementals. Earth, water, fire, air. Put that in rhythm, put that in order, it helps. So if enthusiasm is the breath of God, unenthusiasm is not the breath of God. It's interesting, Zaid, because the most enthusiastic person I ever met was Sam Lewis. By far. Why? Because he was always breathing the breath of God. Not always, I mean, I'm sure he had his moments. But he was always breathing God's breath. He said it. So, now we'll try this.